quickly get to the point and break down how materials work. It's all very simple. We need information. We take this information and modify it as many times as we need. Then whatever we end up with, we plug into the output node into its attributes. The output node is this one right here, the main node. It has its own input values. Base color, metallic, specular, all of these are called the materials attributes. Alright, information is divided into two types. These are data types and data sources. So how are they different from each other? Data types are the information that we input ourselves. For example, I can specify any number, it doesn't matter. This is a regular number, and this is a set of 2, 3, or 4 numbers, which are called vectors. These are all just numbers. Then we have a texture object. This is a reference to a texture, not the texture itself, but a reference to it. We can't just take it and plug it in somewhere. It'll give us an error because, like I said, it's a reference to the texture. You might have noticed that when you connect the texture, when you drag it into the graph, you see that a texture sample node appears. Many of you might be wondering, well, what is this then? What is it? Isn't this the texture? This node allows us to read the pixels, or rather, the information, the color, from the texture. From this texture. The node itself isn't the texture. It's a node that allows us to read the information from the texture. In fact, we don't necessarily have to, as you know, plug a texture in here, but we can. We can specify the texture right here. That's why when you add a texture sample is created, because the texture needs to be read and then displayed. Alright. That's just a point I wanted to explain right away so I can address any questions or concerns you might have at this point. I want to make sure everything is clear before we continue. Okay, next, let's move on to the next part where we will talk about constants and parameters. How are they different from each other? For example, if we take a color such as this particular one right here, white, and then plug it in, then create an instance, specifically a material instance, and plug it in. Now, when we look at the parameter groups tab, we can see that it is completely empty. There is nothing displayed there at all. This is because we specified a color and we want it to remain exactly that way. We do not want to change it. We simply set it and said, let it be. But if we want to gain control over this color during the process, so we can change it, so we can specify it, and so on. In other words, to change it dynamically, we right-click on it and select Convert to Parameter. Now we can name it. Let's talk about color. Now, in our parameter groups section, you can see that a group has appeared, global vector parameter values. This means that all parameters of the vector type are now shown here. The same thing applies if we multiply it, for example, by a scalar value, which is simply a regular number. In this case, nothing changes. See, there's nothing there. But if we convert it to a parameter, it appears in its own group. Alright, and that's it. So a parameter is the same as a constant, but it can be changed. Or rather, it's a value that can be changed, while a constant is a value that we don't change. So if we want to gain control over a particular value, we turn it into a parameter. Then we have situational parameters, but that depends on what we'll be studying, so we'll refer to them as needed. We won't go into the details right now. They're the same as these other parameters, just of their own specific types, and depending on what we're doing, we'll use them one way or another. As I mentioned earlier, the data source is essentially information that Unreal Engine itself provides to us. For example, this includes things like the camera position, the actor position, the object radius, the object orientation, and so on. So these are various types of information that we can read and access directly from the object to which the material has been applied. For instance, if I apply it, for example, if I use it for particles or for VFX effects, then I can get information about those specific objects as well from those particles. If I apply it to some surface, for example, if I have a stone, a tree, or something similar, and so on, it really doesn't matter. I can get information about the geometry. So if it's applied to decals and so on, for example, there are different types. We can get this information. Now, once we get one of these types of information, we then need to modify it. In simple terms, we perform mathematical or trigonometric operations on it. On this information, we can make it brighter, darker, more contrasted, and so on. That is, we do something with this information. The following nodes help us with that. First, we have nodes. here they are: addition, multiplication, subtraction, and so on. And if we're talking about geometry, then then there are material functions. In reality, they're the same thing as nodes. Let's take a closer look at this together. What you need to understand is that inside these systems, or within these elements, there's already a certain kind of logic or set of rules that has been built in from the start. Do you see what I mean? And the developers have simplified many tasks for us. Alright, so that's it. In essence, we just take information, then modify it using mathematical or trigonometric operations. And that's all. And then whatever we get, we plug into the material attributes. That is, into the main node's material attributes. And that's it.